With the 2020 presidential election just days away, what are the paths to victory for the Republican and Democratic candidates, incumbent President Donald J. Trump and his challenger and former Vice President and Senator Joe Biden? How can each get to the 270 Electoral College votes necessary to be inaugurated as the President of the United States of America in January 2021? What do the polls tell us? How reliable are they? Hello and welcome to a special Jefferson Educational Society digital program, The Road to the White House 2020, examining the polls, paths to victory, and the Electoral College, featuring Dr. David Kozak, a professor emeritus at Gannon University and political scientist who studied and taught through 16 presidential elections. I'm Ben Speggen, and I'm the vice president at the Jefferson and am a contributing editor at the Erie Reader. Dr. Kozak is no stranger to the JES, where he served on the Board of Trustees as its chair and has delivered numerous lectures in the past. An emeritus professor at Gannon University, he taught as a distinguished professor of public policy and served as the director of leadership theory at Gannon for many, many years. A career Air Force officer retiring in 1988 with the rank of lieutenant colonel, he taught for nearly 40 years, spanning time at Gannon, as well as the U.S. Air Force Academy, the National War College of Washington, D.C., and as a visiting professor at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, as well as serving adjunct positions in the graduate schools of public affairs at both the University of Colorado and the University of Pittsburgh. A former congressional fellow, he also has served as a political analyst with the Secretary of the Air Force. He is the author, editor, and contributor to more than 10 books on the U.S. government and politics. He has attended the national nominating conventions of both parties beginning in 1984 as an academic in residence doing media commentary for C-SPAN, CNN, and the BBC. He is a past program chair of the Center for the Study of the Presidency, featuring presentations by Presidents Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and Bush 41. His former students from the National War College have risen to the role of National Secretary Advisor to the President, Presidential Candidate, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Service Chiefs of Staff, and Ambassadors. He holds a PhD in Public Policy from the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. David Kozak, thanks so much for taking the time to guide us along the road to the White House 2020 and conversation here.
My pleasure, Ben. It's so nice. Thanks for having me, and I hope I can provide your listeners some insights. I've been studying it. I've been keeping up on it.
Well, so one of the places I want to start, Dr. Kozak, is where we tend to restudy or study perhaps for the first time. Every 4 years, it looks like Americans are looking to learn or relearn our presidential election process, in particular the Electoral College. For those that need a refresher, explain to us how it works.
Well, it's unique to America. It's an American innovation. First of all, we've got to put on the table. It's a series of compromises at the Constitutional Convention that led to this most unique way of selecting what they called in those days the chief magistrate. The bottom line is that your vote, citizens' vote, is counted not individually. There's a national tally, although media will do it. Your vote is counted state by state. So that's the first, major characteristic. The next is that state gets a number of electoral votes equal to their representation in both houses of Congress. That's people say, yeah, why does Pennsylvania have 23 or and another state gets 8 or another state gets 40? It's equal to the number of representatives you have in the House and the Senate. Next is that the voting state by state awards, except in 2 states, the winner of the popular vote in that state gets all of the electoral votes, except for 2 states, and that's Nebraska and Maine. They just are exceptions and have their own hybrid. But that's very important to understand that the winner of the popular vote is winner take all, except for 2. Based on the popular vote. Next major feature is that the winner has to get a majority of electoral votes, which in today's context is 270 electoral votes. The winner has got to get a majority. And if it don't get a majority, we really play by archaic rules. A lot of people don't know it. As you point out, every 4 years we kind of have to relearn it and dust them off. We've used it only occasionally, but essentially, if nobody gets to 270, we have this strange system where the House will determine who the president is, with each state having one vote in the U.S. House, and the Senate votes per senator. So you could conceivably have a president of one party and a vice president of another. It's been a work in progress, the Electoral College. We've changed it a couple of times. In the early days of the Constitution, it actually was that the runner-up got to be vice president. People realized that was bad for all kinds of reasons, and so we changed it. We added the District of Columbia over the years, did some other fine-tuning. It's still a work in progress. That's why I like to refer to the Constitution as kind of an elastic document, as a living document. But that's it in a nutshell. Again, got to keep in mind, it's a series of compromises that were put together at the Constitutional Convention, a compromise between those who wanted a hereditary king, those who wanted a prime minister, those who wanted a president for life, and the office of president is what they came up with, fusing head of state, head of government, and a very distinctive, unique path to power that is we don't have in any other public office in the United States, the Electoral College.
And Dr. Kozak, I want to get to, is this still working? What do we need to do? Should we evolve it? Should we transition? I'm going to get to that toward the end of our conversation, but I know one of the things I hear often when folks are asking about the Electoral College is just who exactly are the electors, and then who's not allowed to serve. So who makes up the body of the Electoral College?
The electors are chosen in each state by the party apparat. In Pennsylvania, for instance, it's the state committee that will choose who the electors are, and that's an important thing because when you vote, you are essentially voting for the electors. Technically, it's the electors you're voting for. Now, the popular vote will determine. But the electors usually are party stalwarts, people that you can count on. It's kind of a prestigious award and a recognition of people being a good Republican or a good Democrat. But it's also, you want to have a dependable person who will cast that vote and not be faithless to the popular vote of the state. Whoever wins the popular vote, their electors then, their slate of electors become the official elector of Pennsylvania and will cast the vote in December. That is really the formal determinative vote for the presidential race.
So, Dr. Kozak, I want to pick up on something that you just mentioned. You mentioned the popular vote. So in the course of U.S. history, there have only been 4 times the Electoral College and the popular vote did not align. One time it happened in the 19th century, 12 years apart, 1876 and 1888. But then again, it happened twice in the 21st century. It skips over the 20th century, but twice in the 21st century. We have 2000 and 2016. Are these 4 just anomalies, or do they suggest something else?
Well, I think, Ben, over the years, I thought it was just an anomaly, and I think I taught it wrong. I taught political science for more than 40 years, and I used to say, that although it happened in the 19th century, it's not likely to happen now, and if it happened now, we'd be demanding constitutional reform. The most breathtaking was 2000, almost a perfect tie, and the winner of the popular vote, Al Gore, did not get the presidency, did not win the electoral vote. And people say, well, it's just a misfire. I actually thought, I used to teach, if it happened, there'd be studies and proposed reforms. Didn't happen. It kind of came and went. But we got to put on the table now that in a period of 16 years, with 2016 being the last example, the Electoral College misfired. The winner of the popular vote did not win the electoral vote, and it's a disconnect that leaves a lot of people uncomfortable and shaking their heads and saying, we're kind of a democracy in name only. And I think this, that it may get down the pike a closer examination. Hasn't yet, but I think we're probably due for one, and I've got some ideas on that. But it's it's like much of the Constitution, kind of evolving and a work in progress, and we may, as a country, revisit it.
I'm going to ask you to hold on to those ideas, and we're going to get to those. But I want to ask you about fairness, too, because that's the other thing I hear most often when people are talking about this. And we hear the pundits, we hear the politicos when talking about the Electoral College, winnowing that conversation to just a few states. Is this fair to all of the states? Is this a fair process?
It's about as fair as 2 senators per state. A lot of distorted representation, but it's what they had to put together at the Constitutional Convention was within the parameters of reality. Is it fair? About as fair as the Senate, but it keeps the Union together. It was the compromises and concessions that had to be made to keep the original 13 colonies, and then as America grew together. There's a lot of defects, a lot of downsides, but there's a lot of upsides as well. A lot of people tell you the framers understood in their wisdom that in a diverse, heterogeneous, pluralistic society, we needed to have mechanisms for conflict resolution and making sure people didn't go off half-cocked, that we kept the lid on society. And this was a way to do it. It was, yes, there is misfire, and it's really, my students over the years would just say, man, this is really a defect in our system. But in the broad sweep, you would say, but it still kind of worked and is true to our foundation as a federal republic. Remember, it was Ben Franklin who said, when asked what kind of government did they give us at the Constitutional Convention, said a federal republic, if you can keep it. And so it's true to that, but it's got some imperfections, but all human institutions do.
And so just as much as folks are trying to count where the electoral votes can be gained, paths to victories, which I want to get to in a second, folks are looking at polls, Dr. Kozak, and we've relied on them heavily in the past to give us an indication of where any election is headed. But you know as well as I do, in 2016, pollsters, a lot of them got it wrong.
They just
what did we learn?
I agree.
What did we learn in 2016? And can what we learned help us trust and rely on polls in 2020?
Ben, it's a great question, and you sit back and say, where did they get it wrong last time? I remember Tom Brokaw saying that pundits and pollsters and they didn't have an egg on their face in 2016. They had an omelet. It was just, they just missed it. And what I think they missed is that there's an underpolling of the Trump supporter, the Trump sentiment. A lot of Trump folks, people who support his reelection, they're newly registered. That's certainly what happened in 2016. He had a lot of people at the end decided that they weren't going to vote for Clinton. They went and registered, and there was the first vote they had ever cast. And I think that what you have to be concerned about as you look at the tea leaves here and why you've got to take polling with some skepticism is that the Trump voter is not on the radar screen of a lot of pollsters. The Trump support is a bunch of people who come in. They not even vote for the down ballot races. They're there just to show solidarity with President Trump. Now, what you also have to just accept in the politics of 2016, this is just a different dynamic in 2020. It's 2016. You had third-party candidates. We have none now, none that are visible that we know of that are spending money to advertise. And you've got a divided Republican base. There's a lot of Republicans who are going to vote. Their pattern will be they voted for Trump, but they're likely to vote for Biden, and it makes it very difficult. And the polls show a kind of a consensus, but they don't have a turnout dynamic. this is really going to be a turnout election, and late voting is going to be a factor. So I think I'm going to be dubious, skeptical, but realize that this situation is probably a little bit different and a little more predictable than was 2016. But we'll have to wait and see. The ultimate poll will be on election night, and then how it's counted over the next couple of weeks.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's going to take some time. I think that's we all want this some immediate gratification in knowing the night of November 3rd, going to bed. We know who the next president of the United States is going to be, whether it's Donald Trump for a second term or Joe Biden for his first. But it could take days, and maybe we can get into that a little bit later. But back to the polls, I can't help but notice, too, and I see people who are skeptical about the polls in 2016 are equally excited and trusting in the polls that a place like a prized place like Texas seems within grasp for Joe Biden.
Absolutely.
And it's, we have, more optimistic polls from people like Nate Silver at 538 that have it a little bit higher. Washington ABC poll has, Trump having a 2.6 lead in Texas. It seems vulnerable. Is Texas at play? Could this really happen?
Well, that's been long a dream of a lot of Democratic activists to put Texas, one of the most conservative states, a bedrock Republican state. Wasn't that way in my lifetime. I've seen it change. I've seen us change from a solid for Democrats go to a solid Republican, with Texas being Exhibit A of a bedrock Republican state. But the demographics are changing. You've got not only growing activism among Hispanic and Latino groups, but you also have suburbs that tend to be much more inclined towards a Democratic message. And it's all coming together. But it also tells us that Texas is not going to be bedrock Republican much longer. The demographics are just changing. And that's why, both President Bushes felt that they had to expand the base of their party. They had to reach out and try to include a very vibrant component of Latinos, Latinas, as well as suburbanites. Is it in play? We'll see. There's a sense that it's tighter. A couple of states that you wouldn't have thought would be in play are, Ben. My model of 2016 worked pretty well for me, and I just would put it on the table now. They're all Eastern Time Zone states. It's Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And my model always was, and I learned this when I was in graduate school years ago at Pitt, that if a candidate would take two of those three, it would be tough to stop them. Not impossible. If you take two of those three, it's a major development that you'll see in the Eastern Time Zone. If it can be made up in Michigan and Wisconsin, so conceivably you can lose two of those three, but you got to win one, and then make it up in Wisconsin and Michigan. And there are others thought to be in play right now. People are talking about Arizona, they're talking about Iowa, Nevada. But I use that maybe because I want to get to bed early. But I kind of last time it was pretty easy. If you use that model, you saw all of a sudden before the 11 o'clock news that major networks had called Florida, Iowa, and Pennsylvania for Trump. That was it. You can't lose all three. Something else for an election night, Ben, I'm going to be paying attention to exit polling. Exit polling still be pretty good, and we know there's going to be wrangling and legal challenges and close means contested, but the fact is we're going to have exit polling. Sample precincts, and those are pretty good to tell us about major demographic developments, major demographic trends, and there's thought to be a couple of toss-up demographic groups. How they vote is going to really determine how the suburbs vote, how women vote, how folks who don't have a benefit of a college education, the non-college educated working people, and now we're told the aged, even the people who are senior, myself included, how they vote. We're going to know that, though, on election. We're going to know how those key demographic young people, how are they voting? We'll know it from exit polls and sample precincts. And so my guess is it might be protracted, but we're going to have some pretty good indicators on how key demographic constituencies vote.
So you were just mentioning, Dr. Kozak, those swing states and paying attention to certain places early in the night. Polls are close in many of the swing states, and so I want to look here because I think this might play into what you mentioned too with the pattern voters of those who went perhaps from Obama to Trump and now might go from Obama to Trump to Biden. Looking at that, when we're looking at the swing states with the polls close, what does Donald Trump, President Trump, need to do to keep them? What does Vice President Biden need to do to flip them? What are their paths to victory in the swing states?
Well, for President Trump, I think it's if of course his challenges, can he put Humpty Dumpty back together again? And have the coalition that he had last time. Re-election is a different dynamic than election. It's going to be very challenging. His path to victory would be he won the Electoral College barely and did not win the popular vote. We just have to put that on the table. We call it a misfire. So what does he have to do? He's got to pretty much recreate what he had going for him in 2016, eke out close victories in battleground states that get him to 270. What Biden has to do is win back some of those seats, and hopefully through an emerging coalition of the suburbs, gender gap, a big turnout with core Democratic constituencies, especially minority groups and so on. That's what his route would be. I always like to, you asked the right question here. I always like to ask students, what would the headline be if Trump wins? Or conversely, what would the headline, what would we say is the major factor? How would we write a headline for a Biden victory? For Biden victory, I think you would say that a Democratic coalition was revitalized, revived, and expanded. In key battleground states. The headline you'd write for the president's reelection would be coalition held, never underestimate the power of incumbency. Incumbency still is a powerful factor in American politics. That's how I would say it. And you can see the president, with flying around in Air Force One and everything, using the advantages of the office. We'll see if it's enough for him to reassemble what he had 4 years ago.
Picking up right there, it's not common in our history of elections for an incumbent to be unseated. In modern times, we've only observed that just a few times, right?
Absolutely. Ben, I always tell people, you got to understand that it's rare when we defeat a sitting president seeking re-election because of the advantages of incumbency, the name recognition, the core supporters, the base, whatever. Yeah, when you think about it, it's only happened 3 times in modern times. It was Herbert Hoover, and they're all explainable. Then you got to come forward. I don't use Gerald Ford because it was a unique presidency. He was never elected or is either president or vice president. Then you go to Jimmy Carter and then George Herbert Walker Bush. There's not that many, and they're all kind of economy-based and idiosyncratic. So we got to put that at the table. Hardly ever do we bounce or fire a sitting president. And it's tough. Sitting presidents have a lot of cards, a lot of resources, not least of which, in that office of president, we fuse head of state and head of government. That head of state is a powerful card for presidents to play. So the office is unique, and we have a unique pathway to it with the Electoral College. It's, again, a series of compromises hammered out at the Constitutional Convention to erect a new regime.
Dr. Kozak, you talked about coalition maintaining, if that's the headline, if Trump wins, or Democratic coalition gets it done if that's Biden. One of the other things you just mentioned was having that base. That's a tip of the scales to an incumbent, is having a solidified base. We saw in 2016, Donald Trump had a solidified Republican base. But
Right.
today, there are notable Republicans speaking out against
Absolutely.
President Trump, everywhere from former Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge, a former governor of Pennsylvania, to the former RNC chair, Michael Steele, who's actively joined the Lincoln
Right.
Project
Right.
to campaign not necessarily for Biden, but against Trump. What does this speak to in terms of this election, looking at now the Republicans, that coalition somewhat fractured? Maybe I'm couching it. I shouldn't even say somewhat. It is fractured. What does it say about this election?
Well, I'll tell you, this is the big difference from 2016. 2016, Donald Trump had about every major Republican vote. Support from, at least tacit approval, tacit support, hidden support, people who just were going to vote Republican, mainly because they were opposed to Secretary Clinton. It was rather, unified Republican effort, and it mattered. They were unified by opposition to Secretary Clinton. It's changed. You've got now more fractured Republican base. This would be, to me, the explanation. If the president does not win re-election, it's going to be because he had something less than a unified Republican base. Biden was able to put together a formidable Democratic coalition. But Steele, John Kasich, you can go through Tom Ridge, the list of prominent Republicans who did not voice opposition, were quiet about it in 2016. It's not quiet this time. There are a lot of people who are actually not endorsing Biden. We've never seen this kind of a crossover for a long time, and it's an important one, a significant one. How significant? We'll wait till the ultimate poll comes in. But it's what makes the dynamics of 2020 so much different than 2016. There's less than a fully unified Republican Party.
And you've said it, I've said it, we've said that magical number, 270. And I know folks can go just about anywhere on the internet to look at projections for how each one of the candidates gets there.
Yeah.
But Dr. David Kozak, I've got you on the phone right now. How do they get there? En masse, 270. What do you see the path to victory for President Donald Trump being? What states must he absolutely win? How does he build the numbers he needs to get to 270, whether it's election night or beyond, as ballots are counted after? What's his path to victory? And then I'll ask you the path to victory for Joe Biden next.
Yeah, well, it's going to be challenging. There's no doubt about it. But the must-wins for Trump would be Florida, Ohio, Michigan. These are must-win states. You got to keep some that we're seeing that kind of trend towards within, that people are saying are in play. Got to keep them in the Republican fold. That would be the Carolinas. He's got to keep Wisconsin in. He's got to try to. I mean, this is an uphill struggle in many ways. He's got to keep Nevada and Arizona in. Can't afford too many losses. Can't afford. It was razor thin the last time. If he had lost two states, he would not have been president. So his path is to get those. We get the early returns. If he loses Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, game's over. Pennsylvania becomes really critical. It's really critical, and we're not likely to know the results for some time. And so many variables still in play with it. But you asked very good questions. If you divide the country, there is a blue kind of a base, and then there's a red base. And Trump has to really keep that red base together. Can't afford defections. And Biden has to just get the blue base, the blue states, the states I always call them along water, the states that are along the coasts, the Great Lakes, and the Pacific coast. You got to get those states, and you've got to ensure good turnout. and that's where it will be fought. It's a big chess game, really, to me. You sit back and it's a state by state strategy, trying to make sure that one state doesn't drop off. And so if you look at it, there's just a habitual red wall and a habitual blue wall. Each has to try to keep it intact and then add to it. And that's going to be the excitement of it, and it's going to be the quandary of it, because it's likely to go on and hinge on close means contested, and it's going to hinge on what happens post-election. What votes will be contested, what votes will be not allowed, the accusations that they'll hurl at each other. It's going to have added expense. Will be in extra innings, I'm sure.
Well, and that's you took the words right out of my mouth, Dr. Kozak. And two of the states you mentioned, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, both have early voting, but those ballots aren't counted until Election Day. There's not an early count on those. And for Pennsylvania, we know this full well with newly no excuses early absentee ballots or mail-in ballots. There's now the opportunity to vote like there never was before. Act 77 passing last November. Infrastructure might not necessarily be ready to take in the volume of early votes that are coming in. Historically, how often have we gone to bed in the past the night of an election day not knowing our president and the count of that day?
Well, a couple of times in my lifetime, Ben, significantly. Of course, everybody remembers 2000. It went on an extra month. And was very controversial and went all the way to the Supreme Court. But earlier there had been went to bed not knowing in 1960. People forget about that. He went to bed. John Kennedy didn't know that he was elected president until about 7 in the morning, when the hotly contested states finally came in. And no one talked about extra innings, and I think in those days, and I think Nixon actually got kudos from people saying he's not going to be part of a constitutional crisis, and they weren't going to demand a recount in Illinois or Texas. Those were the two states that were people thought there might have been some questions. But that was one. The next one for me was 1968. People forget about that. That was a hot-fought campaign, really intense campaign. It had an intruder in it. It had George Wallace, a third-party candidate who took electoral votes. And I remember being in Texas at the time as a young Air Force officer in training in 1968, and people saying at about 8 the next day, we went to bed not knowing, and everybody, I think by noon, Missouri came in, said when it was all hanging on Missouri. Humphrey didn't have a pathway unless he got Missouri. And then when Missouri went and was called, that was it. We've had those times. They're nail-biters, but nothing like 2000. And the concern here is now we're going to have multiple 2000s. 2000, of course, was Gore versus Bush, Florida, recounts in 3 counties, the most populous counties, and we could have multiple Floridas. In fact, I think it's probably more likely than not that we're going to have multiply contested, unless it's a blowout election, unless it's a wave election. Now, that's something else for us to keep in mind. We have seen wave elections where you think it's close, you think you're going to go to bed, it's going to, who knows, there was a third-party candidate in John Anderson, but in 1980. 1980 is an interesting kind of model to use. What happened in 1980 is that over the week, the Jimmy Carter effort fell apart, and people, because of the Iranian hostage crisis, coming to the fore again, and Reagan won handily. People dismissed the third-party candidate, John Anderson. The president was not reelected. And only the last week that you see that was not likely to happen. But the wave election came. It came firm. It came late. And it brought in a Republican Senate that nobody had really thought about. It was a kind of a fantasy for Republicans that they would be able to win control of the U.S. Senate for the first time since 1950s. But it did. It happened. mainly because at the end, and the trigger was that the protracted Iranian hostage crisis back into the fore. There's one possibility here that Republicans have to worry about, with the death toll tragically spiking and surging with regard to coronavirus. It may be that you have this surging wave, and that could make what seems to be a tight race. It's going to be a hard-fought race in a lot of counties, almost inoperative. It will be a different dynamic, in a dynamic of just formidability that takes over, and could change the party control in the Senate as well. That's a possibility, though. There would be a wave elections, and it would wash at the end. But right now, the polling shows within the margin of error, this is very close. It's going to be a squeaker. But sometimes a squeaker can turn into a landslide, just that kind of perception of the state of the country.
Well, I think that landslide is that snowball effect of, we're looking at just a choice few states and how their impact can really tip that election. If that happens in one state, two states, three states, four states, I can see how that what would have been close might actually be a landslide.
Absolutely.
In that. So, Dr. Kozak, going back to one of the things we talked about earlier was the Electoral College, what to do about it, because there are calls to abolish the Electoral College. It's not working for us now, some say. Some think it is still working. Some might say it just needs an update. You called the Constitution elastic, evolving as a document. Yes. What might we do? What's the transition?
Well, the one I've been struck by over the years, Ben, I must tell you, I am not a supporter of direct election. A lot of people say, why not just treat the presidency the way we do all other offices? I worry about the downside of that, the unintended consequences. If you went to the direct election of the presidents, you'd get all kinds of undesirable side effects. I think one would be it would become a media contest in the big metropolitan areas. The notion of a federal republic would probably suffer. I think what you would get is the candidates that would raise the most money would go and spend it in the big media markets, and the campaign would be conducted that way. We'd be writing off big segment of American society, which would be kind of sad. We would make a lot of flyover states. I think the Electoral College actually has some very good traits still. There's some very good aspects. So what I've been persuaded is the best was something that is called the Automatic National Bonus Plan. This has really been developed by a fellow who's just down the road from me here in Colorado. It's Tom Cronin, a distinguished professor at Colorado College. He's long touted this as an alternative to go. He said that what you would do is just change a sentence or two in the Constitution that would make, first of all, the electoral vote automatic. You wouldn't have the electors. You wouldn't have a faithless elector, because that's a ticking time bomb. That we've had faithless electors. People go against the popular vote in their state. You can fine them for it, punish them subsequently, but you can't prevent them from casting the electoral vote. They are kind of free agents there. But the bigger part of Cronin's plan, besides the automatic, you just have the secretaries of state certify who won the popular vote, and then the winner of that would automatically get the popular vote of the state. The one I like with him is that you keep the best of the Electoral College, which is to make sure that the candidates don't write off any significant segment of American society or any geographic region, that you'd require candidates to conduct a nationwide campaign, but you'd give 100 bonus electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote. That would ensure that you wouldn't have a misfire. You get 100 bonus electoral votes for winning the national popular vote, and you keep the best of the Electoral College. You don't throw the baby out with the bath. The big value of the Electoral College, to me, Ben, is over the years, it ensures that whoever is president, whoever chief magistrate, is undergirded in their presidency by some semblance of national consensus, national support. What I think we forget, the Electoral College works against third-party and factional candidacies that plague us. That's what worried the framers. So let's go to the example of President Clinton. President Clinton long said that he had difficulty as president because he got only 43% of the popular vote. Go back to 1992. 43% for Clinton, 37% for Bush, and 20% for H. Ross Perot. Clinton said that hampered his presidency. Most people agree that members of Congress would look at it and say, well, I ran ahead of the president. He didn't feel obliged to follow his leadership. It made it very difficult for him to achieve a legislative agenda. If Clinton had trouble at 43%, without the Electoral College, I think you would have many candidates. You'd have maybe a 5-candidate race. This year, you might have people that would run independent or party. Well, if it's a direct popular vote, anybody can win, and they'd get into it. They'd get funding for it. And instead of electing a president with 43, which is a pretty slim majority in a multi-candidate race, you'd have a president of the United States selected by perhaps 25% of the population. The Electoral College protects us from that. It ensures that whoever wins has some basis, some broad basis from which to govern. So I would be hesitant to throw out the baby with the bath and to court some unforeseen, unanticipated downsides that would give us a cure that's worse than the ailment.
Right, and I think one of the things that comes top of mind to me is the celebrity factor. You know, where somebody is now elected simply because they're a household name, they're
right.
common. It's not somebody who has a history of civic service and has had a path of being elected. And that's a risk we could run. Turning it over to a true popular vote, just getting celebrity to play an outside.
Oh, huge! That money
in an election.
Yeah. Yeah, celebrity and media. Remember Hendrick Smith, the longtime New York Times columnist, once counseled about in presidential races that we lose sight of how running for president is a lot different from being president, and it's a great chasm there. And if you went to direct popular vote, I mean, I understand why people would want it, but the problem is that certain skills are needed to work the system. You got to be able to work within the system. And if we went to just popularity contests, I think you would lose the potential of getting people in who know how to pull the levers of power and make the system work. It's an ongoing challenge. Each election shows us the ongoing challenges of the American political system. To be true to the framers' spirit, yet to have institutions that make it work and can put our ideas into practice. And presidential elections every 4 years are an opportunity for us to take stock in that and ask ourselves, what do we want our country to be, and what is the future, and what path best takes us. And framers were worried about passions of the masses overtaking the continuity of the nation, and we got to bear that in mind. An excessive factionalism. America doesn't work very well with excessive factionalism. It's something that concerned the framers and ought to concern us all.
And Dr. Kozak, I know we're nearing the end of the conversation here. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Erie, Pennsylvania. We talked about Pennsylvania, the key role that it plays in this election. We know the key role that Erie County played in the 2016 election, going red, so to speak. I know we used the colors. It went red instead of blue. First time since Reagan's re-election bid in '84. With a lot of the eyes of the nation and a lot of media coverage from The Hill to NPR to NBC to Washington Post and beyond to Axios, what are you seeing from afar when you look at these places that folks drill down to, one particular county, 1 out of 67 in one state out of 50 plus the District of Columbia? What do you see when people drill down? And watching from afar, what do you see that perhaps those that are too close to it tend to miss?
Well, to me, what's happened is Erie County, Western Pennsylvania, has become truly a purple battleground. By that I mean it's no longer solid red nor solid blue. It's a battleground. It is got the right demographics. But it used to be considered, Western Pennsylvania by marketers used to be seen as a test market. That it had all the right demographics. It was a mix of urban, suburban, rural, small town. That it was a test market. If you could sell it in Erie, it showed you that you had a draw. You had patterns that you'd want to include as you marketed your product. So what it tells me is that America, you can see the tribalism, the partisan, hyper-partisanship of our politics right in Erie County. And nothing can be taken for granted, and it's going to be about, above all else, turnout. It's base mobilization. Whoever mobilizes their base is the one who's likely to prevail in this very, very hyper-partisan and close, very competitive situation. And it's Erie is the crossroads of it. Erie is a darn good barometer, and you've got the pattern. Last time Erie County went for Trump is a surprise. Now the question is, how many Trump voters will break off and vote for Biden, or can it be recommitted by President Trump in a re-election bid? Stay tuned, because you're really at the crossroads. You've got you're in the middle of the lab. You're watching it firsthand.
Well, when enough pundits and political scientists call you a bellwether, you're a bellwether. Dr. David Kozak, final question for you, and you just talked on the pattern voters. We talked about a lot of things here in this conversation. If you had to sum it up in 3 or so dimensions of what folks should be looking for in this election as we draw closer and closer to the presidential election of 2020, what are those 3 or so dimensions that folks need to keep top of mind?
Well, it is like a Rubik's Cube, Ben. It is 3 dimensions. It's multidimensional, and you got to keep that in mind. So you're going to look first at swing states. You're going to look at the battleground states. The big ones are just, all in the Eastern time zone. Let's look at those. And then the other ones that have been identified. Let's look at Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and see if some others would peel off. I'm going to watch Georgia. If Georgia comes in and and it's significant one way or another, that's going to be a bellwether. So I think in terms of swing states and battleground states, and I'm going to watch Georgia, and then the big 3 that are right in Erie's region. Next thing I'm going to look at is what are called the swing demographics, the suburban vote. The gender gap with women, going to look at non-college whites, how they're voting, going to look at minority turnout, going to look at the young vote and see if the senior vote is in play at all. That's a second. The third for me is how many Trump supporters are going to vote for Biden. People who voted for Trump the last time over Hillary, how many of those will migrate over to Biden? And conversely, how many people who voted for Bernie Sanders were strongly for Sanders both in 2016 and in 2020? How many of those folks are going to turn out to vote for Biden? How many people who voted for Clinton last time are going to maybe vote for Trump's reelection? You've got to look at these patterns. And also patterns of registration. How many new Republican registrants are there, and how many new Democratic registrants are there, and what is their commitment? What we've seen in the Trump years is the power of intensity of preference. Intensity of preference and enthusiasm is a very important variable, and it will no doubt determine who's the winner is and what happens this year.
Fascinating, critical, important things to look at. Dr. David Kozak, political scientist, emeritus professor, and presidential election studier and teacher. Thank you for taking us along the road to the White House 2020 and sharing your knowledge and insights with us.
My honor to be with you. Thank you for your excellent questions. I hope I did a half-decent job of answering them for you, but it's been an honor, particularly given the caliber of guests you've had in the past. It's an honor to be in their company, particularly Charlie Brock, a dear, dear friend, Andy Roth. Those are people I know you've had conversations with, and it's an honor to be counted with them. Thank you.
Dr. Kozak, it's an honor to have you. We are so grateful for your astute insights. And folks listening in, to stream other Jefferson Educational Society programs on demand, please do visit jeserie.org. There you're going to find more details about both upcoming programs as well as a wide range of publications, from quick, timely reads to reports to essays and more, all free to download. And be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Speggen. Be safe, be sound, and thanks for listening and learning with us.